Welcome to today's episode of Kids Town Corner. Today we are going to answer a question that might seem kind of crazy, but can my kid have cavities and not feel a thing?
Right. We'll have parents come in all the time and we'll diagnose cavities on the x-ray and show the parent, and the parent's like, oh my gosh, he never said anything. Why didn't he ever say anything? He's never complained about any of his teeth hurting. And so yes, you can have a cavity before there's any pain. And so things that'll contribute to whether or not your child is feeling pain or not is how big is the cavity, how deep is it. If we've caught it early enough where it's just gotten through that protective enamel layer and it's not very deep, then there's probably not going to be a lot of pain and a lot of sensitivity with that cavity.
Right, as that cavity approaches the middle of the tooth where the nerve is, then that's typically when we'll see that. I say typically because everyone's wired differently, and especially with kids. I mean, we'll get kids in that have deep cavities or may have abscesses that have really said very little, if anything. I had an example of a little kiddo from Eastern Europe when I was in residency that mom brought him in and said, yeah, he's got a lot of problems with his mouth. And I opened his mouth, and I mean, for me to be blown away and, shocked by what I see in a mouth takes a lot. And this, I'll never forget. I look in this little kiddo's mouth and I look at his x-rays, and of the 20 baby teeth that he had, 18 of them were abscessed and essentially decayed to the gum line. Like, he had all but 2 teeth were essentially gone, except for just, mushy root tips with a ton of infection. It was bad. But mom didn't report any pain. Like, I looked at her, I was like, so he sleeps at night? He's been fine? Yeah, he sleeps. How does he eat? Well, it's kind of hard because some of these are a little sharp, but he does okay, and I couldn't believe it. And so that's the extreme example of not feeling pain. Now, has he had chronic pain? I'm sure. Was it a very gradual process? I'm sure it was a gradual process that he just got used to, and that usually explains a lot of that.
Yeah, everyone's pain tolerance is different, and little kids, their pain tolerance can sometimes be pretty high, and a lot of it's just because of how distracted they are. Their mind's going a million miles a minute, and they really don't focus on that pain until maybe at night when you go to lay them down to go to bed, and their mind kind of slows down, and all of a sudden they start complaining about this tooth. So there's a lot of things that go into it, whether or not your child's going to complain, how deep the cavity is, is there an infection or an abscess present, like Dr. Brett talked about, their pain tolerance, if they've been dealing with it for a while, they may get to the point where they just kind of get used to it, stop complaining about it. But the fact is that yes, you can have a cavity without having any pain, and honestly, before there's any pain, that's the best time to take care of these cavities, because the longer this goes on, the deeper that cavity gets, the more complicated it is to treat that tooth, and the less options we have available to us. Like Dr. Brett said with that child, the only option available to Dr. Brett at that point was to extract the tooth. So by getting in early, it gives us more options. We may be able just to take care of that cavity with just a simple white filling. If it gets deeper than that and starts encroaching on the nerve of the tooth, then we've got to do some type of, whether it's a root canal or a pulpotomy where we're removing the entire nerve from the tooth or part of the nerve from the tooth. And then also we may end up having to do a crown instead of a filling, because too much of the tooth structure is gone at that point and the tooth won't hold a filling, and the only way to restore it is to put a crown around the tooth. So by coming in every 6 months, getting regular checkups, and getting these cavities fixed before there's any pain, it's going to make it a lot easier to take care of. It's going to give us a lot more options, and you're going to sleep a lot better at night.
Absolutely. So yeah, I think that really wraps up, can there be, or do I only treat a tooth that has pain? It's the opposite. Like, let's stay ahead of this, because at that point it's a lot of times too late to really do much. We'd much rather stay more conservative. Your kids tolerate the treatment better. Let's face it, when there's a white filling versus having to do a mini, root canal and crown on your kid's tooth or pull a tooth. It's way easier to just catch it earlier, more cost effective, more time effective. Everything is better. Yeah. So do not wait until your kid's teeth hurt to fix them. Stay ahead of it. We see both sides all the time. I mean, we saw, especially as we were training, when we'd be on call in the emergency room at the local children's hospital, we'd see the teeth that people waited way too long, and it can get really serious. It can even be life-threatening, and there have been children that have died from dental infection. So that's the very worst case scenario. We don't want any of that even remotely close to any child. We want to stay ahead of it. Let's start these. If your dentist tells you there's a cavity, and we show you and we educate you on where the cavity is and that we would treat it, we're going to look at that from what would I do with my own kid. In this situation, I totally would do this for my kid because of this. And that's how we're going to approach every one of these. So hopefully that's been kind of an eye-opener on how cavities work and why some cavities hurt and others don't. And if it's been beneficial to you, please share it with others, family, friends. If there's questions, concerns, comments, whatever, put them down below. We'll get back to you for sure on that. And we hope you've enjoyed today's episode. Thank you.